Today's daf is daf Kuf Vav. We'll start at the top of the Yomi. The Gemara now is going to address the question of kavana in chalitza. It's a big sugya, very important sugya. And the question is, how important, how critical is it for the Yavam and the Yevamot to have kavana? And this will touch on the question of Tanai, whether or not a Tanai in chalitza is valid, is meaningful. Tana Rabbanan. Chalitza mutes kshera. V'ezu hi chalitza mutes. So what is a chalitza under false premises? Omer Lakish, kol omrim lo chalotz. They tell him, and they deliberately fool the Yavam into thinking that b'kacha takonsa, that by doing this chalitza, you will be miyabimha. So he's interested in Yibum. The last thing on his mind is chalitza, but they convince him that this is the ceremony necessary for Yibum. And kshera means that even though he has anything but kavana here, meaning kavana's chalitza is to be matir her l'shuk and allow anyone else to marry her, that's not his kavana for sure. Nevertheless, it's kshera, and she's muteris l'shuk. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan. Now, it's not clear to me who exactly Rabbi Yochanan is talking to. We had a Tana Rabbanan. So I don't know, Tana Rabbanan is usually a brisa. That's not clear to me. Maybe you have a footnote on that. In any event, Amalei Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, I guess to the person who quoted this brisa, maybe it's Reish Lakish actually, because Reish Lakish interpreted the brisa. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan is talking to Reish Lakish because Reish Lakish was the one who offered this interpretation of the brisa. We learned in a brisa that Beinshin is kavin hu, v'lo niskavna hi, Beinshin is kavin hi, v'lo niskavin hu, chalitzosa psula, ad shetiskavnu shneim kecha. We require, and this is explicit in the brisa, both the kavana of the Yavam and the kavana of the Yevamot. He and she have to have kavana l'shem chalitza. And if that be the case, you're telling him that he's being miyabimar through this act of chalitza. There's no kavana whatsoever. It's got to be psula. Ad amr chalitzasa kshera. But once again, I don't know if we would fault Reish Lakish, but we only fault Reish Lakish for his interpretation of the brisa. Rabbi Yochanan will be forced, in the light of his premise that you need kavana, to reinterpret the brisa. Ella, how do we interpret this brisa? What's the case of chalita mute? Says Rabbi Yochanan, kol sha'omrim lo chalotzla, al menashe titen lecha masayim zuz. They want to entice the Yavam to do chalitza, so they promise the Yavam that the Yevamah herself will pay up an enormous sum of money, 200 zuz. That's about 100 goats, and that's what you'll get for the chalitza. And at the end, she did not, fork over 200 zuz. There was no kiyum tanai, and yet the brisa says chalitza's kshera, meaning that the tanai is not valid. Now, the reason why the tanai is not valid, that has to do with what's called mishpatei atnoim. And those are the rules and regulations that govern conditions. And they are derived from Bnei Gad, Bnei Ruvain. That's the biblical archetype of tanai. And amongst the various rules that govern tanai, one of them is Ol milsa de isa b'shlichus, isa b'tnai. Ol milsa de lesa b'shlichus, lesa b'tnai. So on the kind of action that you can appoint a proxy, an agent to represent you, that kind of action lends itself to tanai. But something which doesn't lend itself to shlichus, for example, chalitza, You cannot send a shliach for chalitza. You have to come personally. Only the yavam can be there for the chalitza. So it's a davar she'efshar al yidei shliach. And since it's the efshar al yidei shliach, therefore it's the efshar al yidei tanai. But here we have to add another element into the equation. And that is that since this Tanai does not fulfill the requirements of Tanai, therefore the rule becomes I batel v'maisa kayin. So the action that he did is valid and generates whatever chalos it has to generate, even in the absence of the kiyum Tanai, because he had no ability to create the Tanai. But why should the maisa be kayim? Why not say, well, there's something called tos, there's something called the chisora das. I mean, he didn't want this kinyan, he only wanted it on the following conditions. He only wanted the chalitza if she'll pay him 200 zuz. So forget about Tanai. Leave out the parsha of Tanai. Okay, Milsa less of a shlichus, less of a Tanai, but still it's a tos. It's not what he wanted. He was not interested in this chalitza. So on this point, we have a lot of Torah from Reb Chaim Brisker. He says that there's a difference between das and kavana. Das means when you have the ability to form and design a chalotz. The chalotz, it's chal as a result of your das, and your maisa is an expression of your das. There are other situations in which all the Torah requires is kavana without das. Das, that willingness to create a chalos, is not necessary. For example, in our case of chalitza, all we need is kavana. He has to be aware of the fact that this is a maisa chalitza, that his shoe is being taken off. But he doesn't have to have das. And the proof is that he cannot send a shliach, because to create a shliach, you can only create a shliach for a maisa on which you have das. That means you create the maisa and its ability to generate the repercussions of that maisa. And therefore you can send a shliach to represent you. You sort of give the shliach the das to stand in your place. But in the case of chalitza, there's no das, it's only kavana. The maisa chalitza has to be performed, and the chalos is created memela automatically by the Torah. And in such a case, there's no das, then you can't make a tanai. But what are you going to tell me? Well, he wanted it only under these conditions. That's irrelevant because we don't require das. Das means, did he want it? Did he not want it? Under what conditions did he want it? What did he want? And there's a code. But if there's no requirement of das, all we need is kavanah l'shem ha'maisa, then even if he didn't want it, it's irrelevant because it's not a matter of what he wants, midaito. It's just a matter of setting up the maisa chalita with kavana, and then the chalos is chal memela, automatic. Tanya nami hachi. The Gemara quotes a brayso to support Rabbi Yochanan chalita mutes kshera. The eza hi chalita mutes kol shomer lo chalot sal menashe titen lecha masayim zuz, and she doesn't deliver the masayim zuz, and yet the chalitza is kshera ma'isa b'isha achas shenafluf ne yavam she'ein hagun la. Now, I'm not exactly sure what it means that the Yavam was, quote unquote, Eino Hagun. He wasn't suitable. Could be that this means there was a tremendous disparity in age. It might be that she came from a certain kind of a family and he came from a different kind of a family. You know, he came from a family of thieves and mafios. I don't know. But in any event, Eino Hagun, and she rightfully was not interested in Yibum. She needed chalitza to marry anyone else. The Amrulo, so Bezdin, in order to trick the Yavam into agreeing to do chalitza, they told him chalotza al menashe titein lecha masayim zuz, that make a condition in the chalitza that you want to get paid off masayim zuz. So we might call up extortion today. And then after he did the chalitza, lo and behold, she's not going to be so forthcoming and transfer him to his bank account, Masayim Zuz. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Chia validated the chalitza without the payment of Masayim. So this is a clear-cut proof to Rabbi Yochanan. Now here's another story that took place also would support Rabbi Yochanan. Hudavi asu lekamid Rabbi Chia bar Abba, a Yavam came and he wanted to force the Yevama lisyabim. Omar Allah, so Rabbi Chia turned to the Yevama and encourages her to be misyabim. Biti amodi. Amodi means, now's the right time. Stand up and do the mitzvah. The mitzvah here is lisyabim. Omar, but she says to Rabbi Chia that Ima, the mother of the Yevama. Now, who's talking here? It could be Amr Lay, which would mean that she said to Rabbi Chia, but more likely Amr Lay Ima, her mother piped up and addressed Rabbi Chia directly. And she said the following words: Yeshivasa zuhi amidasa. Normally, when we say stand up and do something, it's because it'll be for your best benefit. But here, yeshiva, meaning non-involvement, don't do it. That's your better choice. Amallah, so Rabbi Chia turned to the mother of the Yavam and says, Yadat le, do you know the Yavam? Or does your daughter know the Yavam? What gnai, what's so terrible about marrying this man and being Mekayim the great mitzvah of Yibum? Amrole, so the mother turns to Rabbi Chia and says, I know what the problem is. Mamona huda chazala. He realizes that she's a rich woman, and he wants to consume all her money. That's not exactly hagun. Amallah, so Rabbi Chia says to the Yevama, lo nichalach, do you not want yibum? Amallah. So what she heard from the mother, what Rabbi Chia heard from the mother wasn't good enough. He wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth, from the Yevama herself. And sure enough, that's what he heard from her, that she's not interested in Yibum. The problem is that the Yavam is interested in Yibum. Now we have a real problem. She doesn't want Yibum. He wants only Yibum. She wants Chalitza. He's not interested in giving her Chalitza. Once he gives a Chalitza, he can never marry her. So what is Rabbi Chia going to do, knowing full well that this Yavam is interested in money and he's not Hagun? Rabbi Chia feels compelled to confuse him, to mislead him. The Amar Lei, and Rabbi Chia says to the Yavam, Chalotzla ubekachata konza. This is even more radical than the recommendation that we had before of Knosla, and you'll make it tonight that you'll get 200 zuz. Knosla, you should chalotzla ubekachata konza. Not chalitza for the sake of 200 zuz, but this is the way you're being Makadisha. You're taking her into your rishus and generating ishus. Lebasa de chalatz. Now, this is not a very good chalitza because we said chalitza needs kavana. And here, his kavana was l'shem yibum. He wanted to be konesa because that's what the rabbi said he was going to do. That's what he was going to accomplish through this chalitza. So Reb Chia says to the choletz, he says, Hashta minach ifsalala. From now on, you cannot be miyabim this woman. Because a chalitza psula, as we mentioned many times, generates an iser yibum, and apostles are on the achin. So that you've already accomplished, even with this chalitza psula that lacks kavana. Now, look, what do you lose by giving her chalitza? What do you vengeance? You're not going to be able to miyamim. That I can promise you. So give a chalitza. Chalotzla chalitza ma'al yisa. And this time, do it the right way. With kavana l'shem chalitza to be mater al l'shuk, kiechi b'tishtere li'alma, so that now she can marry anyone in the world. He says here in the footnote, quoting the Meiri and others, that we can beat him up if he refuses to do chalitza. Because since there's no yibum, then all that's left is her situation vis-a-vis marriage in the shuk, and therefore she's an aguna, and we can actually physically compel him to participate in the chalitza. Now, a similar story to the one that we just learned now in Rav Chia, we find with regard to Rav Papa. Bas Chamua de Rav Papa, this is the daughter of Rav Papa's father-in-law, which means Achos Ishto, and her husband died. V'nafel lifnei Yavam she'eno hagud lo. Also l'kamei d'Abaye. And the Yavam comes in front of Abaye with the goal of forcing the Yevamot to agree to Yibum. Amalei, Abaye says to the Yavam, Chalotzlo b'kachat hakonsa. Again, the same story that we saw in Rav Chia, now we see in Abaye, and he tricked the Choleitz into thinking that now he's doing Yibum. Amalei Rav Papa says to Abaye, why did you have to go down that route? Lo Savalei Mar Lo Hoda Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Why didn't you go down the road of Rabbi Yochanan? That would have been a simpler recommendation. Instead of telling the Choleitz that he's Amanas Lekonta, makes it into a Chalitz without any kavana, why not just tell the Yavam that he's going to get Masayim Zuz? So Abai responds to Rav Papa and he says, what do you recommend? So apparently, that's what the Yavam did. So that although Abai said to the Yavam initially, now he changes his tune and he tells the Yavam, you'll be a rich man, you'll get Masayim Zuz. Lebasa de Chalitzla, after the Chalitza, Omar Allah, Abai says to the Yevama, Zil Havla. Abai, in a sense, naively thinks that there is a T'nai in Chalitza, and this chalitza would only be valid if and when she pays him 200 zuz. So he encourages her to pay the 200 zuz. I mean, you obligated yourself to pay the 200 zuz, so live up to your obligation. Amalei, Rav Papa says to the Yavam, she doesn't have to pay you Masayim zuz. She has a right to claim, Meshata ani becha of delay. Now, what's Mashatari B'cha? That's a phrase that appears in many, many sugyas in Shas. When you're in a desperate situation and you take upon yourself to pay a certain sum of money, sometimes it's an exorbitant sum of money, in order to encourage someone to do what you need desperately that he should do. So if you're in jail and you know someone who can get you out of jail, you offer him $1 million to get you out of jail, you have a right to say, M'shatani ba. I never meant it seriously. I only meant it to try to impress upon you and entice you to stand up on my behalf and salvage me from the predicament that I find myself. And here's a situation where she desperately needs chalitz, otherwise she can't get married to the shul. And when she agreed to pay him 200 zuz in order to entice him to give chalitza, that was Mashat Anibach. She was only doing it because of a desperate situation. It wasn't a genuine and valid dasa mischai. Milo Sanya, our Papa says, I'll prove it to you from a brisa. He was trying to escape from jail. And he got to a point where there was a river crossing, and Ma'abra is a boat, Lefanov, so he really wants to get on the boat because he's a fugitive. He's running away from jail. He's got to get on the boat as soon as he can. So this man who's running away from jail, he has to entice the Balasfina to carry him over to the other side. And he says to him, Tol dinar va'avireni. Now, the normal wages, let's say, for getting on a boat is a fraction of a dinar, but he was willing to pay a full dinar, or so he said, to convince and cajole the Sfina guy to drive him across the river. Therefore, since he only said it as Mashat Anibach to entice the guy, but he's not a serious ischayvus, therefore, ein lo el eschar. The boat driver could only demand wages, not beyond. Alma, so we see, Amar le Mashat Anibach, that anyone who says something under duress and is mischayev themselves under ones can claim Mashat Anibach. I was never serious about it at all. Is Hachanami here too? If she agreed to pay 200 zuz in order to entice him to give a chalitza, is this chalitza is not a chalitza at all. So now Abai sees that Rav Papa is really, in a very sharp kind of way, is sort of like digging it into Abai. Amalei, so Abai says to Rav Papa, I see how sharp you are. Where is your father? Now, you could interpret this question as, who is your father? Your father must be you have tremendous genes in the family. Alternatively, is your father supporting you in Torah learning? Now, again, I don't know the age of a papa, but I'm assuming that his father brought him up and paid tuition so that he could get a good Torah education. Amalei, Papa says, B'masa. That's the name of a city. Then he asks him, Imachech, where could I find your mother? Amalei, Papa answers, B'masa. So basically, what Rav Papa is saying is that both my parents are in the city. And there's a whole conversation here going on between Abai and Rav Papa under the surface. Because on the surface level, Abai is just inquiring, where are your parents? And the answer is always the same, they're in the city. But on a deeper level, Abai is implying that the reason why you are so sharp in your understanding of Torah is because you have both a father and a mother. Abai, after all, was an orphan. And you have both a father and a mother, and they're taking care of all your needs. You have no tirda. So you can win me in an argument in Torah and say, well, I shouldn't have said that, I should have said that, because you're independent of the world. Financially, you're on your own 2 feet because your parents are supporting you. And Abai himself didn't have parents to support him, so he had to make sure that part of his time was dedicated to bring in a loaf of bread. Now, this is called, in the language of Shas, what happened here with Abaye is called an ayin, an asinas ayin. We have a principle, this is a Gemara Moed Katan, Kol makom shenosnu chachamim einehem. Again, they nosnu chachamim in a person. That person is not going to, either they'll die or they'll become very poor. Very often you'll see in the Gemara, nosnu einabo v'nefach legal shel atzamos. He became a pile of bones. So this investigation that Abai was doing to tell Rav Papa that you're a big shot because you have parents and they're supporting you, you get your weekly allowance in the mail. That's called Nasan Einav Bahem. Again, I don't think they were physically there, the parents, and I certainly don't think that Abai had in mind what was going to happen. Yoev be'ene ushchivan, and they died. So this is called Nasna Ba'ena or Sholta Ba'ena, and a Talmud Chacham. He looks in a negative way at someone, it could have a devastating impact. Tana Rabbanu, we learned in the Brisa, Chalitza Mutes Kshera, but get Muta also. So if there was a mistake in the get was given al Tanai, then it's not valid to get. But if the chalitza was done al Tanai, then it's kshera. And the Brisa continues, chalitza meuseis. If someone, meaning a bezdin, forced the choletz to give chalitza, psula. But get meusa, if he was forced to deliver a get, kosher. So the Gemara now analyzes this. What is this case that we're dealing with in the Brisa that the get, even though it was given under compulsion, it is kosher, it was the chalitza's psula. If as a result of this fear of beating him up, he declared rotzani, all right, leave me alone, I'm willing. Is then a filu with chalitza nami? We have a case of chalitza. He was forced with patch, to agree to give chalitza. He agreed. He said rotzani, and it should be valid. V'lo amar rotzani is get nami lo. It shouldn't be kosher in get, because in get we need midaito mirtzono, and he never made a statement of rotzani. The Gemara answers hachikam. Chalitza mutes li olam kosher. There's no t'nai in chalitza. Chalitza muter, the get muter li olam posel. Because it's t'nai in get. Get is given midas, and if she didn't fulfill the t'nai, the get is null and void. Chalitza meuses, the get meuse, whether it's chalitza that was forced by Bezdin or a get that was forced by Bezdin, is zimnin kosher, is zimnin posel. And what does that mean? When the Brisa says that a get me'us is kosher, that's because he declared rotzani. So Bezdin forced him, and he declared he wants. And that din would apply to chalitza as well. And chalitza me'uses is kshera if he declares rotzani. But the Brisa that says that chalitza me'uses that was compelled, it's psula, that's lo omar rotzani. He never made the statement rotzani. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, this Brisa is addressing the korban ola, and in the pasuk it says lirtzono, Yaakov also lirtzono. So on the one hand, Yaakov also means, and the two redundant words in the pasuk, Yaakov also, you'll have to bring it. Malamich kofno. If he took a neder and he's going to bring a korban, if he doesn't bring the korban, we're going to force him to bring the korban. Yachol. Shall we say that, what do you mean, you're going to force him, I feel about karachol? Tamalo l'rtzono, the pasuk says, Yaakov l'rtzono. So how do we reconcile this? Yaakov also means even against his will force him. And then it says in the same pasuk, Tzona Lifnei Hashem, which means that he has to want to do it, and excluding a Bal Karcha case. So how do we reconcile this? Kofanos Hachiyoma Rotzani. Before he says Rotzani, then it's not Lertzono, and the karva would be impossible. Once he declares Rotzani, okay, we have his Rotzon. And now we go back to the pasuk Yaakov also, which means we're going to force him. But at the end of the day, after we force him, he's going to declare Rotzani. V'chein atomotzi b'gitei nochim, kofanos hachiyoma Rotzani. If he refuses to give a get, we'll beat him up until he finally agrees and he says Rotzani. Omar Rav Tzchor, Omar Rav Huna. We have a case now of a Yavam and a Yevamot that came into Bezdin. And the Yevamot wants Chalitza. Is Choltzin Afal Pisha in Makirin. Bezdin does not recognize who's the Yavam and who's the Yevamot. And yet we're going to encourage Chalitza. We don't want to wait to do investigations. Let's just quickly chaparain, as we say, before it gets too late, and implement the Chalitza. And the same thing in Mir, Memanin, Afal Pishain Makirin. We don't recognize her. We certainly don't recognize her husband, but we're going to institute Maimar. I'm sorry, Miyun. Oh, but if you're telling me that they don't, the Bezdin doesn't recognize neither the Yav, the Yevamot, or the Mema'enes or her husband, is lefichos. Therefore, ein kosmin get lechalitza. The Bezdin is not going to give her a proof document, which is called a get chalitza. Get means a shtar chalitza. Elam kein makirin. If the Eidim testify in front of the court, they have to add, we know the Yavam and the Yevamot. And then we can write in the shtar, Ikarnu osam. Based on this Eidus, we know who they are. Same thing, Ein kosu get miyun. We don't write a shtar miyun for a ketana. Elim kein makirin, unless we know for sure who the ketana is and who her husband is. And only then can we write a shtar, get miyun, that she has proof that she is out of that marriage. And why is this so necessary? The chayshina lebezdin toin. We have to be worried about the fact that in another bezdin, they may have heard that they gave her chalitza, and if they relied on it, then we'll rely on that bezdin. But in truth, what the second bezdin doesn't realize is that the first bezdin didn't even recognize the Yavam and the Yevamot. The Rava Didei, that all this was Rava the name of Rav Huna, but Rava himself, Omer, the opposite is true. Ein cholkin elam kein makirin. We're not going to allow Bezdin to be choletz, the Yavam and the Yevamot, unless they recognize the Yavam, that he's the Yavam, and the Yevamot, that she's the Yevamot. The Ein Mimanin, and we would not allow a Ketana to be Mimanis, Elam Kein Makirin. So it's not like Rav Huna, who said that Bezdin is going to go ahead with the Chalitza and the Miyun, even though they're not Makirin. No, Rava says we can't allow them. That's too dangerous of an operation. Lefichach, because again, it might come up in the front of another Bezdin, and they'll rely on the first Bezdin, who knew the choletz and the choletzes. And now Rav is saying, you're right, they can rely on the first Bezdin, because Bezdin will not get involved in this case without recognizing the choletz and the choletzes. Lefichach, kosmin get chalitza pishay makirin. Since we know that the Bezdin must have recognized the Yevama and the Yavam before they oversee the Chalitza, now we can write up a shtar, and in the shtar it says that she received chalitza, and give her the shtar. And when she wants to get married to someone in the shuk, she could always pull out the shtar as proof. The kosvin get miun afal pisha ein makirin, and the same thing is true for miun. Oh, so kosvin get chalitza af pisha ein makirin because we know that the original bezdin recognized them. And in the case of miun, we could also write a get and give her evidence and proof that she was freed from that marriage, so she married another marriage. And we're not choshesh that bezdin told. We're not going to be choshesh that maybe bezdin allowed for the chalitza, the miun, and that bezdin without hakara.